over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled GOP, how dare you tell the truth? And it's about a series of articles that have been published in both the Washington Post and the New York Times over the last 3 weeks, tracking down or showing how researchers who are looking into lies and disinformation are now themselves being, in the crosshairs. They are the targets of lawsuits and congressional action designed to basically intimidate them and shut them up. I start out with the story of Kate Starbird, who is a researcher at the University of Washington on disinformation. And she's mentioned in both articles. And, she thought she was doing the right thing, tracking down the source of deadly lies that killed 500,000 Americans, the COVID lies, and also almost led to the overthrow of the U.S. government, January 6th, and all the stuff around that. Where did these lies come from, she wanted to know. And she's not alone in this. There's a whole bunch of researchers. She was the one that was profiled in the Washington Post. But little did she realize when she started this research into something that, makes perfectly reasonable sense, that the very people whose behavior she was studying would use the power of government to try to destroy her work, stop her funding, and even try to destroy her personal life and her reputation. And not just hers. I mean, right across the board. What we see now is there are lawsuits coming out of a couple of right-wing groups affiliated with the Trump administration. We're seeing Jim Jordan, who is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, has subpoenaed a number of these groups. He's subpoenaing reporters. He's subpoenaing people who are involved in research into disinformation, lies, misinformation. And of course, you get a subpoena from him, and in many cases he's subpoenaing, quote, all emails, correspondence, tweets, social media, everything going back to 2015. Now just imagine, you get a thing, you're sitting at home and a sheriff comes up and says, here, you've been subpoenaed. And the subpoena says that you've got to turn over to Jim Jordan's committee every email that might even peripherally touch upon any of these topics or any correspondence with other people who are investigating these topics for the last 2015, 8 years? Could you even do that? And Jim Jordan is threatening to put people in jail, in prison, if they refuse to, if they don't comply rapidly enough. And the effect of this has been to completely intimidate people. I mean, they're going after interns, they're going after students who are working on these projects, they're obviously going after professors. Why are they doing this? Well, it's for a very obvious reason in my mind. The Republican Party used to call themselves the party of ideas. Remember this back in the 80s? If you're old enough, you remember this, the Reagan administration. We're the party of new ideas. We've got some great new ideas. Unions are actually they're driving down wages on workers, the Republicans said. I mean, it was a lie, but people bought it. Union bosses are corrupt and they're enriching themselves. Well, that's a lie. Union bosses are paid a salary. It's not like they're CEOs who make money if the stock goes up, right? These were just lies. Voter fraud is caused by black people in the cities, and we got to crack down on those cities in order to stop. Another lie, a demonstrable lie. Climate change is not caused by fossil fuels. It's a natural, it's sunspots and stuff. Another lie. I mean, they're still promulgating these lies, right? Many of them go back to the 80s and Paul Ryan and his new ideas. But, public school teachers are part of a union-based communist conspiracy. Gays, lesbians, and trans people want to convert your kids. Teaching American history injures white children. Cutting taxes on billionaires helps average people. These are all lies. These are Republican lies. COVID is like the flu and the vaccine is dangerous. Expanding Medicare or regulating big pharma will break our healthcare system. Russia didn't help Trump. The media has a liberal bias. Public schools have failed. Abortions and birth control cause cancer, infertility, and regret. January 6th wasn't a traitorous coup attempt. This is the universe of Republican lies, and there's probably others that I've missed here, and feel free to call me. In fact, I'll go in and edit my article and add them in. But these are the big ones, in my opinion. The big, 10 or 15 Republican lies. And now we've got some researchers, credible university groups and the German Marshall Fund and the University of Washington and others who are looking into where did these lies come from and how do they get spread. And Jim Jordan is doing everything he can to stop that research. And he's being effective. He's being successful. The New York Times had one professor say, I won't even talk to you on the record. I'm afraid for my family. People have been doxxed. They've been swatted. They've been outed. They've been harassed. Kate Starbird deleted her Twitter account, which had 50,000 followers, because she was, being stalked, cyber-stalked. This is, well, as William Shirer said, the historian who lived his first few years, or not his first few years, he lived in Germany through the first few years of the Hitler regime, and then left Germany and went on to write The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which is, the seminal narrative of history of the Third Reich. He wrote, in Nazi parlance, educated meant intimidated, to a point where all would accept docilely the Nazi dictatorship and its barbarism. Well, the MAGA wing of the Republican Party is devoted to education in this context. And the reason that they can pull it off with Jim Jordan doing this is because the Article 6 of the Constitution says that he can't be held to account. This was the exact same, it says, members of Congress shall in all cases except treason, felony, and breach of the peace be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and they shall not be questioned in any other place. In other words, Jim Jordan can do anything he wants, and nobody can stop him. He has immunity. This was the exact same immunity that was used in the 1950s by Senator McCarthy. Drunken Senator McCarthy, we should add. Joe, good old, tail gunner Joe, they called him, because he pretended to be this was his campaign thing, taking pictures in the gunning tail of I think it was a B-25. So, they can't do anything. People can't stop them. They can't stop him. As the Washington Post reported earlier this month, quote, the pressure has forced some researchers to change their approach or step back, even as disinformation is rising ahead of the 2024 election. The deluge of bad information about disinformation researchers' work has also led to a torrent of digital harassment, threats, and smears. Kate Starbird said, the political part is intimidating to have people with a lot of power in this world making false claims, false accusations about our work. So where did this come from? Where did this idea come from? Well, this is Steve Bannon's strategy. All these lies that I'm citing here, that they're trying to stop anybody from outing them. Steve Bannon told reporter Michael Lewis, the Democrats don't matter. The real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with the S word. I mean, he actually said the word, you know what I'm talking about. Bannon later added, this is not about persuasion, this is about disorientation. And as the New York Times noted, researchers face mounting legal costs and questions from directors and donors about the risks raised by studying disinformation. Online attacks have also taken a toll on morale and in some cases scared away students. So here we have Jim Jordan, the guy who is deeply entangled with Trump's efforts to overthrow our form of government, but appears to have escaped any accountability with regard to that because of the timidity of Merrick Garland. And perhaps the corruption of Chris Wray, I don't know. But Jordan comes out and says, without a trace of irony or self-consciousness, he says, whether directly or indirectly, a government-approved or facilitated censorship regime is a grave threat to the First Amendment and American civil liberties. Yeah, Jim, tell us all about it. This, this government-run facilitated censorship program that is now coming out of the House Judiciary Committee, and other sources as well. There's other groups as well that are launching lawsuits. This is crazy. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. Our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica, at Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization present. So the United States held on to it, particularly because of its geographic location, which would provide the United States with a stronghold on the easternmost tip of the Caribbean. The book is Fantasy Island by Ed Morales.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, it's Thursday. What is that, Mini Friday? Yes. Oh, my. Donald Trump is complaining that Fox News is using a big orange picture of me. Oh, poor Donald. I really think he's toast. I mean, I think this is it. I think Fani Willis she has pinned him like a butterfly on an entomologist's wall. Yeah, terrible metaphor, but you know, you get it, right? I mean, it's incredible. That said, and I want to talk about this in the first hour of the program. I'll get to it in just a moment. Trump's crimes against democracy tower far above his 4 indictments. Also, Stochastic Terrorism Alert. A Trump-supporting woman has been charged with threatening to kill Judge Chutkan. And, oh, by the way, is Trump turning himself in on Fox or against Fox as counter-programming to the Fox debate next Wednesday? We'll talk about that also in this first hour. And the attack, the raid on the Kansas newspaper is getting stranger and stranger. I'll get into that in this hour. In the second hour of our program today, Phil Ittner is going to drop by, our friend, the war correspondent who is living right now in Kyiv, Ukraine. Is the Russian economy tanking? Yesterday, Russia raised their interest rates substantially because the ruble has just collapsed. We'll talk about that in the second hour. Also, will DeSantis be the next Republican politician heading for prison in the second hour? And a crazy alert in our second hour. A 13-year-old girl has emerged as the head of a faction of QANON, and she is vowing to indoctrinate the children of America. Say what? In the third hour of our program, Mifiprestone, the abortion drug, sort of made it through the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, but sort of not, and it's up to the Supreme Court now, and this is going to get very strange. I'll tell you all about that at the top of the third hour. Also, people are shocked and have never seen this sort of thing about Jared Kushner. Where's the congressional investigation? I don't get this. Also in the third hour is the Montana youth case, a harbinger of things to come. I mentioned this yesterday about these young people in Montana who won this environmental case. Well, guess what? It looks like this is going to start spreading all over the country, which is really good news, very positive news. So all that said, Donald Trump's crimes, my headline over for my daily take over at HartmannReport.com today is titled, Trump's Crimes Against Democracy Tower Far Above His 4 Indictments. This is Trump and his MAGA followers and the billionaires, I mean, Trump himself being a billionaire, but the other billionaires who support him and support the MAGA politicians out there, they have really declared war, not just on America, but on democracy itself. These right-wing billionaires, they view democracy as frankly, as a pain in the ass. And whenever Democrats start talking about they need to pay their fair share, they view it as a threat. And they're supported by a media machine that is by and large owned by billionaires, 1,500 right-wing radio stations, Murdoch's Fox so-called news, think tanks and publications based in every state in the nation, all dedicated to advancing the interests of the oligarchs, the fossil fuel industry, and the autocrats that are coming up in the MAGA movement. The weapon these people use is suspicion of racial, religious, and gender minorities. And the reason that they're pushing that is because the natural distrust that working class people, and in this case, working class white people, the natural distrust that working class white people have and have historically had is a distrust of really rich people and of corporate bosses, with good reason. But the really rich people and the corporate bosses are saying to the white working class, oh, no, 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 you don't need to be worried about us. You need to be worried about that black guy down the street, or that Hispanic guy, or that gay person. Those are the people you need to be worried about. You know, they say the Jews and blacks are colluding to replace working class white people. Where has that gone? Well, it's led to the murder, of the slaughter, really, of 11 Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue, 9 blacks at the Mother Emanuel Church, 23 Hispanics murdered in El Paso. The main weapon they're using in this war against democracy is distrust. After 247 years, they want us to believe that America has lost it, that our republic, our form of government is unreliable, is feeble. It's been taken over by weak liberals bent on feminizing our nation's men. And then this becomes the foundation of the homophobic and transphobic hate that we're seeing displayed across our nation every single day. From Tucker Carlson's testicle tanning, to Josh Hawley's new book on masculinity, to these groups terrorizing school boards and teachers and trans kids. Their sales pitch is that only strong, forceful leadership can restore America and America's white men to mythic greatness. You know, this obsession with virility and strength is the calling card of fascists and dictators worldwide and throughout history. I mean, it's even transformed a large portion of American Christianity. I told you about this a couple days ago. You know, Russell Moore, the editor of Christianity Today, saying that pastors are telling him that their congregations don't want to hear about the preachings of Jesus anymore because it's too weak. This is nothing new, by the way. Alexander the Great, Rome's various Caesars, Napoleon, Mussolini, Hitler, all of these autocrats gained power by declaring themselves the saviors of a nation's men and the nation's strength, virility, and potency. This is why rape is used as a weapon of war. Has been used by all of these people. It was used by Alexander the Great. It was used by the Caesars. It was used by Napoleon. It was used by Mussolini and Hitler. It's why Putin is using rape against Ukrainian civilians right now. It's why Republicans are rallying around a man who was just convicted of rape and has been credibly accused of dozens of other rapes, including a 13-year-old girl. Violence, while antithetical to democracy, is the favorite tool of authoritarian leaders like Putin and Trump. Putin's use of state violence has successfully cowed most Russians. They're terrified of going to prison. Trump's call to violence on January 6th was resoundingly answered, and it's now being justified by MAGA Republicans in Congress and his followers. And the key to inciting that violence and then using it as a political weapon is to claim victimhood, for the leader to declare that he's getting revenge for all the slights inflicted on his followers by those he considers his political enemies. Back in 1532, Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a book called The Prince, offering advice to leaders, right? How to be a Machiavellian leader. And he talked about how, as a leader, if you declare that your followers are victims and you're the one who's going to get revenge on their behalf, quote, this is from Machiavelli himself, quote, words can't express the loving welcome such a savior would get, the thirst for revenge, the unswerving trust, the devotion, the tears. What doors would be closed to such a man? Who would refuse to obey him? What envy could stand in his way? What man would not bow his knee? And this is what we're seeing. I mean, you know, this call for violence, this call for force. I mean, you had Matt Gaetz. We know that only through force will we make any change in a corrupt town like Washington, D.C. He said that just a couple days ago, standing right next to Donald Trump. Trump's actions in 2020 around COVID led to 500,000 unnecessary American deaths. His followers just shrug at that. Hard men don't cry. But this is just the beginning of it. The other pieces of the Trump MAGA Republican war on democracy in the United States and around the world include hatred of a free press and eventual destruction of a free press, replacing it with organizations that call themselves news but are really just pushing a party line. Distrust of democratic governments, like ours and like the members of the European Union. The embrace of autocrats like Hungary's Viktor Orban and Russia's Vladimir Putin. Corruption of public officials with promises of money and power. Seizure of the stabilizer of a democracy, its court system. Impoverishing a middle class that may rebel against autocracy. Training young people to have the same, to hate the same minorities the party used as foils to seize power. Rewriting history and blurring its meaning. Ending our constitutional form of government in favor of a Trump-like strongman, rule by decree. And threatening law enforcement if they don't bend their knee to the strongman. Right-wing billionaires have been rehearsing rewriting the Constitution now for over a decade. Every year in Washington, D.C., they get together. Just 8 months ago, Donald Trump came right out and said, I am calling for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. And he's not alone in this. Vivek Ramaswamy, just day before yesterday, said, most Republicans favor reform. I'm on the side of revolution. Right. Trump has taught his GOP acolytes well. If violence is necessary, use it. A survey last year found 40% of Americans agree that if elected leaders will not protect America, the people must do it themselves, even if it requires violence. Fully 12 million Americans believe violence would be justified today to return Trump to the White House. Trump has issued thinly veiled threats of violence against the prosecutors, judges, and even the grand jurors who participated in holding him to account. And yesterday on his Nazi-infested social media site, Trump referred to the black judge in D.C. and the black prosecutor in New York, prosecutors in New York and Atlanta, Alvin Bragg and Fonnie Willis, and the black judge, Judge Chutkan in D.C., as, quote, riggers. Right. You don't even need a secret decoder ring to know what he's saying to his followers. In fact, all across Truth Social, they're now referring to these black prosecutors and judges who are holding Trump to account as riggers. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Right now, the names of the grand jurors in Georgia are being passed around on right-wing bulletin boards to be doxxed and to be targeted for intimidation and possibly even murder. Marjorie Taylor Greene is running pictures of herself pulling up in a military vehicle to the Capitol building with an assault weapon. Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott are putting together SS-style armed militias loyal exclusively to them. I mean, this is where we're at. This is not just a stolen election. This is a MAGA war on democracy itself in the United States and all around the world. And we damn well better wake up to that soon. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. I'll be right back with more. Stay with us. And welcome back. Franz in Trumansburg, New York. Hey, Franz, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm continuing with my obsession on climate change and geoengineering. But this time there's a couple items in the news which are relevant.
Okay.
At the end of last week, I don't know if you saw it, the Energy Department awarded $1.2 billion to a company called Climeworks for direct air capture.
Yeah, I saw that. It's kind of mixed news because there's a whole bunch of environmentalists who are like, this is a scam that the fossil fuel industry is using to say we can continue to pollute the atmosphere because, hey, we can pull that carbon back out eventually. On the other hand, new technologies very often don't seem to work. I mean, you just have no idea where they're going to go. I remember when the first transistor, the CK722, came out, and I bought one. I was 13 years old, made a little oscillator with it. And nobody imagined that one day, you know, you'd have 5 million transistors or 50 million I don't know how many in like an iPhone. I mean, you know, it's like you just don't know where technology is going to go.
But I mean, it seems to me it's too soon to be scaling up that technology.
Yeah.
And the other piece of that news is, for me, the very next day, I saw a TED Talk by Al Gore where he just really just trashed not only, you know, the fossil fuel companies and executives and the petrostate leaders, but also trashed specifically direct air capture technology as a dead-end technology as it stands now. Right. There are much better forms of it. There's like regenerative agriculture.
Yep.
There's kelp farming. And like you mentioned also last week, the iron filings on the ocean. Yep. Now, and part of my point in calling obsessively about this topic is I believe that we as voters need to be informed and understand the nuance, because there are good approaches and there are bad approaches. Like the iron filings, a couple of years ago, I saw an interview with someone who I'm sure is doing great work in Southeast Asia, humanitarian work related to climate change, who was just completely dissing that idea of spreading iron filings to get the algae growth and suck out the carbon dioxide.
Well, you never know what the consequences are going to be. I mean, it might disrupt fish habitats, for example.
Yeah, and I think that is an appropriate concern, but just broad brushing all geoengineering because it is geoengineering, I think is a big mistake.
I agree.
And especially in the context of really, we've been geoengineering for thousands of years.
You bet.
And we geoengineer.
That was the agricultural revolution. That was geoengineering.
Yeah. Building a road, putting a road down is geoengineering.
Yeah. Arguably.
Building a city is geoengineering. These are all heat sinks. They're all absorbing and re-radiating, absorbing light and re-radiating.
Yeah, technically, I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs here, but I get your point. Franz, thank you for the call, and thanks for, staying on the topic. It's an important one. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program. Talk media for the sane among us. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with you. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So remember the John Durham investigation in which he said, the FBI never should have looked into Donald Trump's connections to Russia. And I'm scratching my head going, how can he even think this? I mean, the guy that Donald Trump hired as his first campaign manager, Paul Manafort had taken $66 million from oligarchs associated with Vladimir Putin to install Viktor Yanukovych as the dictator of Ukraine. $66 million. He took money from, he was paid $1 million by the dictator of Zaire, back when it was Zaire, to develop a strong relationship with Moscow. And when finally they threw Yanukovych out of Ukraine, that was in 2015, what did Manafort do? He came to the United States and he said to Donald Trump, well, let me help you, while he's taking money from Moscow. I mean, if nothing else, that should have been a starting point, a huge starting point for the FBI. There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So per my earlier rant about this isn't just about elections. This is about a war on democracy. In a democracy, if you lose an election, you say, well, I lost. Good luck. Winner. I wish you well. I hope for the best. We may disagree on politics, but I wish you well. I mean, this is what every president since George Washington has said on the way out of office until Donald Trump. And now a woman down in Texas has been formally charged by the Texas police, Abigail Jo Shree of Alvin, Texas. She threatened to murder Judge Chutkan, and she also threatened to murder Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, another black woman, a Democrat from Texas. She called up and left a message for Judge Chutkan saying, "Hey, you stupid slave," followed by the N-word, and then going through a list of all the people she was going to kill, which included Sheila Jackson Lee. And then she said she was also going to kill, quote, all Democrats in Washington, D.C. and all people in the LGBTQ community, although she didn't use such refined language. She said, "You're in our sights. We want to kill you. If Trump doesn't get elected in 2024, we are coming to kill you, so tread lightly." And then use the B word because this was directed toward Judge Chutkan, who is a woman. This is what Donald Trump has brought us. Now, next Wednesday is the Republican debate sponsored by Fox News. Trump has said he won't show up. We'll see. Friday is the day that he has to turn himself into the jail in Fulton County in Atlanta. There are many people who are speculating that Wednesday during the debate, instead of showing up for the debate, Trump will show up to be processed at the county jail, so that Fox News will be forced to cut away from their own debate. Or if they don't, there will be no coverage of Donald Trump being arraigned or being booked. I'm betting on this. I mean, I think it would be just an absolutely brilliant move by Donald Trump to play Fox's game, to beat Fox at their own game. As I mentioned when I opened the show, he's rather hysterically truthing over on his Nazi-infested social media site this morning that they're using the wrong picture of him. It's too orange. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question, in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His hand was a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him and, by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, a.k.a. history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a supine at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. Did you know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. So a two-page memo has been leaked from DeSantis' super PAC, Never Back Down. It's actually by Jeff Rowe, who's the founder or leader of that super PAC. For the debate strategy for Wednesday, DeSantis is definitely going to be there, and Trump probably won't be. And so this debate strategy, the memo reads, and I quote, defend Trump when Chris Christie attacks him. Trump isn't here, so let's just leave him alone. That's what he's just too weak to defend himself here. We're all running against him. I don't think we want to join forces with someone on this stage who's auditioning for a show on MSNBC. You know, this is a reference to Chris Christie because he showed up on MSNBC a number of times. About Ramaswamy, this 38-year-old, rich guy who's actually picking up in the polls with all his rhetoric about, I don't want reform, I want revolution. DeSantis is supposed to take a sledgehammer to him, calling him fake Vivek and Vivek the fake. I don't know what that means. And DeSantis is now being, broadly ridiculed on the right for this. So anyhow, keep an eye on it. It's interesting stuff. Picking up your calls here, Jill in West Collingwood Heights, New Jersey. Hey, Jill, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I love your show. It reminds me that intelligence still exists.
Well, thank you.
Anyway, I have two questions involving January 6th and purpose of action. The first involves the gallows. Now, I work for a large home improvement store. They didn't sell gallows. These people had to buy the parts, build it, transport it, unload it, video it,
right,
and load it later and transport it away. It's all done with purpose.
Yeah, and let me speak to that for a minute, if I may, Jill, and then I'll toss it back to you. A couple of days ago, I was like, oh, this gallows is functional. And somebody called up and said, no, if you stood on it, your head would be above the noose. And so I said, okay, what's not functional? And then somebody sent me a picture showing that, there was a steps leading up to it. And, it was pretty tall. And so I said, no, I guess it is functional. And then yesterday, somebody else sent me another picture, or a whole bunch of pictures, actually. They're all over my Twitter feed, showing that, yes, if you're standing next to the gallows on the ground, the noose is like 12 feet up in the air. But if you're standing on the platform, the noose is only about 5 feet up in the air. So how can you hang somebody if you're only 5 feet up? And so my answer to that is real easy. You stick their head in the noose and you push their feet off the edge of the platform, and now they're hanging and they're dead. So back to you, Jill.
Yes, or after they're dead, hang them for...
yeah, well, there's that too, the way that they were going after Pence.
Yeah. And Pence is the next one.
Yep.
After Trump tweeted that Pence was a coward on January 6th, there was a bullhorn announcing this to the crowd.
Yep, within 1 minute.
Yes. So that's also with purpose. But yesterday they did it because Pence, he said that he did not, he wasn't able to change the votes and all that. But anyway, he was in the news, and they showed the January 6th shot and the bullhorn announcing this tweet. And I noticed for the first time 2 men on the steps in among the mob in suits and ties. Now, the only people I know in suits and ties were Congress people.
Well,
and do we know who they are?
I doubt they were members of Congress, because Congress was meeting in session, and we probably would know by now who they are. Odds are they were just people who work in Washington, D.C. Who went along. Yeah, well, not everybody was dressed like a military person. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Jill, I don't have an answer for that one, but thank you for the call.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing this all up, and thanks for your kind words.
And thank you for all you do.
My pleasure.
Right.
Thank you. Mark in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, buddy, how you doing, man? Love your show. Hey, I'm an old-time listener from back in the Air America days.
Great. Thank you.
That kind of dates me. So, hey, I wanted to talk about crystal fascism.
Okay.
I don't think enough is enough on the left about it, and how it has been a planned doctrine in a lot of churches for years. I used to hit on it a lot of times back in the old Air America days on how it all started, how the dominionist theology started, and I think that kind of migrated or came together with with a lot of corporate interest to push through their agenda. And I think that's the main problem that's happening in politics today. So what's your take on that?
I think that wow, there's just a whole bunch of different thoughts here. Number one, any religion that is monotheistic, and arguably religions even that aren't monotheistic, kind of prime people for wanting to have a big daddy, you know, to have an omnipotent leader, you know, a godlike figure. And so it shouldn't be surprising that particularly coming out of Christianity, you would have this semi-fascist movement, this Christo-fascist movement, that sees democracy as, you know, inherently flawed and weak and problematic. Secondly, you're right. This movement has been around. You know, the Christo-fascist movement has been around forever. In fact, I would argue that you know, it preceded even the colonization of North America by Europeans. It was, you know, at the foundation of the British Civil War. It was at the, and it goes way back before that. I mean, you can take it all the way back to the Crusades, arguably. You know, and in fact, I think you could argue that for most of its history, the Catholic Church was practicing some variation on that sort of thing. You know, we are the ultimate power. We are the military power. You must do what we say. If you don't, we will burn you to death, or we will hang you, or we will torture you. I mean, this is the majority of the history of organized religion, organized Christianity in the world. So it shouldn't surprise us, Mark. I mean, you know, in terms of what to do about it, I think the main thing to do about it is to try to help, particularly for people who still consider themselves Christians, to try to help Christianity recover its footing, you know, to not recover its organized religion footing, but recover its footing in the teachings of Jesus. You know, promoting the Sermon on the Mount and Matthew 25, which are the core of Christianity. And this is what Russell Moore was talking about, you know, in his editorial in Christianity Today, in his interview with NPR a couple of weeks ago, where he talked about how concerned he is that Christian pastors are telling him that their congregations don't want to hear about Jesus anymore because he was just too weak. Don't give us that turn the other cheek stuff. Instead, they want to hear Jeremiah, you know, Isaiah. They want to hear the fire and brimstone prophets. Jeremiah. So those are my thoughts on it, Mark, for what it's worth. Okay?
Thanks, buddy. Love your show, man.
Thanks a lot. Nelson in Fort St. Lucie, Florida. Hey, Nelson. Thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I'm just thinking here. We Democrats and Patriots need to stop using the words that the Republicans choose for themselves. You know, because they're calling themselves MAGA Republicans, you know, Make America Great Again, that's implying, and it's like, they're really fascists. They're fascist Republicans, and they're not white nationals. They're like counterfeit Christian fascists, is the way I see it. And
I think people get that, Nelson.
Yeah, but we continue to hear ourselves calling them, you know, white nationalists and Christian nationalists, and you know, those types of names are names that they choose for themselves. And they're really fascists. We need to emphasize the word fascist, I think, in order to get our messaging straight. You know, as far as pro-life, they're not pro-life, they're like pro-birth. Yeah. And so the messaging, I think we need to really drive the point that they're fascist.
Okay, point made. Really? Nelson, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. Thank you for the call. Well said. Susan in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Susan. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was. What a scary start you had intro with the takedown of democracy, and what I noticed in a lot of people or a lot of talking heads when they're talking about fascism. To me, they miss an important point, and maybe I'm wrong, but the one guy kind of started to talk about it, and that's the privatization of our government and the takeover of corporate control, because it seems to me they're the ones supporting this propaganda for a reason, because they're filling their pockets. And to me it's like they're that's always seems to be the most important thing, is who's getting the money.
I think that's an important point.
As they take down our government and the corporations start to rule us, fascism, they use fascism and religion to increase their power.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just a thought.
No, you're absolutely right. Eisenhower warned us about this. And, you know, the military-industrial complex, it's not just that. And the privatization process of the federal government really began in a big way under Reagan. It was an intrinsic part of the Reagan Revolution. This is, you know, the whole neoliberal agenda is to replace democracy, replace government with corporations. And in fact, you know, the definition of fascism used to be the merger of corporate and state interests combined with belligerent nationalism.
To me, then, our answer is pushing our Bidenomics in the bottoms up.
There you go. I'm with you. Susan, thank you. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where despair is not an option. Picking up your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us. And welcome back. Joseph in Capitola, California. Am I saying that right, Joseph?
Yes.
Hey, what's up?
I just wanted to say I'm surprised at how we always back down from this guy. Everybody's like runs and hide under the bed from this guy. He's broken every law there is on the court proceedings. He should be put in jail. And then, if they're going to bring on the vigilantes, just let them show up. And because don't we have a military to protect us against terrorist groups?
Well, and there's not an inconsequential number of liberals who are, you know, armed and dangerous, as it were, too. I mean, it's, but you know, let's not wish this direction on anybody. I mean, you know, violence is not the solution.
No, I'm not wishing that. What I'm saying is, like, look in New York, when he went to court, there were 11, 12 people there. Mm. Maybe it's overblown how big they are. Let them show up. Then we know what we're dealing with.
Yeah. I think that what's happening here, number one, Trump's base is shrinking. The GOP is shrinking with it. The question is, will the Republican Party be able to stage a comeback, you know, to being the party of Mitt Romney and George Bush rather than the party of Donald Trump? I don't think that they're going to be able to pull that off before the 2024 election, which is going to be a really bad thing for the GOP in 2025. But, you know, we'll see. I do think, though, that by 2025, 2026, I think within 4 or 5 years, that the Republican Party will have put Trump behind them. And because they've lost power. And the billionaires who are fueling the party, who have been all in on this whole fascist agenda, the whole MAGA agenda, at some point they've got to sit back and go, wait a minute, this isn't working. You know, this is not getting us what we want. It's just getting us more Democrats in power. And so I think
I agree. It's going to have to burn itself out. It's going to. It's going to.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. Joseph, thank you for the call. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to bring up Musk because it came out, you know, in the last
few days. As in Elon, not fragrance?
Elon, covering for Trump, not refusing to give over the information on Twitter. Yeah. And I guess finally, when the judge said $350,000 today, tomorrow it's going to be $700,000, and then over $1 million the next day, he had to cough up the dough, and then he hands over the information. Right. I consider him just as dangerous as Trump, actually, because he's a hypocrite. Now, I do have a Tesla. I bought it 4 years ago. I had already seen the 60 Minutes interview, which kind of, you know, put up a few red flags for me. Mm-hmm. But they had all those charging stations, and there weren't a lot of other charging stations. Yeah. So
there's a lot of products that we all buy where we have no idea, or frankly don't care what the politics of the company that makes them or the CEO of the company is. You know.
That's true, but I am planning on getting rid of it, and you know, I've got 2 EVs I'm looking at.
Yeah, you got to check out the
anyway,
Ioniq 5, Dennis. It's an amazing car.
I think I might be going in that direction, and then I can be consistent with my attitudes about. And he never tried to remove your content, has he? Because he certainly has of other left-wingers.
To the best of my knowledge, no, he's never removed anything. Interestingly, though, in about a year, the number of followers that I have has not grown at all, which is kind of strange. It was steadily growing for years, then he took over and it just kind of froze. Dennis, thanks for the call. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. You know, back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies, Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And you know, climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. And voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here. Tyrone in Chicago. Hey, Tyrone, what's on your mind today?
I'm doing all right. How you doing today, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Yes, Tom. I'm number 45 in this thing. Tom, now, the question I want to know, if he can't run for president, if people's right in, does that make a difference?
If people what? Does it make a difference?
If people write Trump's name down anyway as a write-in candidate.
Oh, if they write him in. Yeah, no, there's never been a write-in candidate who has ever won the presidency. In fact, I think the only write-in candidate who's ever won a national office was Lisa Murkowski up in Alaska, and that's a small state with and her father was the governor before, and her name was really, really well known, and all that kind of stuff. I think that's the exception that proves the rule, Tyrone. I don't think there's a chance.
Yes, but I was saying, can the people's right in anyway, if he's not eligible to run for president?
Even if he's not eligible to run for president, people can write his name in, but that doesn't mean that he can, number one, it doesn't mean he'll win. He won't. And number two, it doesn't mean that he can hold the office. So, we'll see. We'll see. I am more of a fan of him being beat at the ballot fair and square, unambiguously, than his being kept from the ballot by the 14th Amendment, Section 3. I think that it's important for America to know, absolutely without any doubt, if Trump is the Republican nominee, and there's probably a 50-50 chance right now that he will be, maybe even higher than that he lost, and just nail it. And he's not going to get away with lying about it again, I guarantee you. Tyrone, thanks for the call. Mark in Portland. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, 2 quick points. Did the Georgia state budget allocate money for security for people in jury pools, such as the current one with the indictment of Trump and the RICO case and all the jurors having their names out there and everything else? I mean, are they going to get security detail? Are they going to be in a protected place?
I don't know. I haven't seen any reports about that. What I have seen reported in the media is that most of them have deleted their social media profiles and are trying to scrub the web of anything that might point out where they are, who they are, where they live, and that on some of the right-wing message boards there are active conversations where they're pouring through the list and trying to identify these people so that they can intimidate them or punish them, or in some cases there have been calls to even kill them.
I mean, and to my point, to the second point is, there really needs to be a replication of the Southern Poverty Law Center throughout the country. I mean, every state should have a PLC that monitors all the state groups, and they should be talking to each other. And beyond what the FBI can do, there needs to be a coordination of each state.
The ACLU does a lot of that, and they have branches in every state. They're not quite as aggressive at calling out or naming or identifying or shaming people. They tend to be more actual lawsuit kind of stuff, But
this would be domestic terrorists.
I
mean, that's.
I agree.
And everything else.
I agree. Good point, Mark. Good point. Thank you very much for calling and making it. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, by the way, in terms of the SPLC, on the basis of materials I get from them on a regular basis, I'm pretty sure they go where the terrorists are and don't limit themselves to the South.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, no, I've been a fan and a donor to SPLC for a lot of years. They do great work.
But anyway, what prompted me to call was defense of your position that the gallows of January 6th was potentially functional. There's an example from history of someone who tried to overthrow a country's constitution through violence, and that was a guy named Guy Fawkes. Mm-hmm. You may remember the 5th of November and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, with the dynamite below Parliament.
Well, not dynamite yet. That was gunpowder, I guess it was, yeah. Enough to blow up both the House of Lords, the House of Commons, and the royal family, and anybody else who was standing nearby. Well, after he was sentenced and he was to be executed, he was on his way up the steps and jumped off, so that his demise was a suicide rather than an execution.
Oh, interesting.
So all you'd have to do with that gallows is have it on a high enough base.
Well, and the nooses are never so high you can't fit it over somebody's neck. I mean, the noose is always low enough that it can go around a person's neck, and then you either drop them through a platform or you push them off the edge. It's real simple.
Right.
And that's why the thing was 5 feet above the ground, so they could push Pence off the edge. I don't think this is rocket science, Mike. I agree with you.
I don't think I disagree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this. I guess it's gallows science, right? I didn't know that about Guy Fawkes, about him killing himself so that they couldn't have the satisfaction of pulling the lever. That's fascinating. Mike, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I tell you, I learn things every day from the people who listen to this program. Thank you so much. We'll be back. We're going to continue the conversation with Phil Ittner is going to drop by. For the next 10, 15 minutes, we'll talk about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and then I'll be back to picking up your calls and the news of the day. So stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back!
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down, and as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP, because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent based out of Kyiv, Ukraine. Right now, you can follow his video blog over on YouTube. All you have to know is how to spell his name. It's 6 letters, Philip Ittner, 6 letters in each, Philipittner. And that's also his, actually backwards, it's Ittner Philip is his X handle or his Twitter handle, but definitely worth following both. And Phil, welcome back to the program. I'm first of all, before I get into my questions, how are you? How is Kyiv? How is Ukraine doing right now?
Generally fine. We've got some serious air raid warnings going on here in the capital today. I think I counted 4 or 5 today alone, and then other places out west as well. So we continue to get pelted, or at least under the threat of being attacked. So that's always a constant.
I noticed yesterday, I believe it was, a piece in the Financial Times about how the Russian central bank just raised their interest rates like hugely. I mean, you know, like up to like 12%, I think it was. And this is because the value of the ruble has just, I was in Moscow in December of 2015, and my recollection is it was 7 rubles to the dollar at the time. I may be wrong. I might just be misremembering, but it is down to what, like 70 to the dollar or 80?
It's more.
It's worse than that now?
I think I saw that a ruble is basically a penny.
Yeah.
So even circling around the 100 mark. So it's bad.
Yeah.
It's very bad. Moscow in 98, the last time the ruble was devalued, and I remember the panic and the run on the banks and the serious destabilization that happened, which ultimately led to finding a replacement. So this is no small thing.
Yeah, I'm with you. So how might that affect the war effort? And is that, I'm assuming, is Ukraine using their own currency, or are they using the euro? They're using their own currency.
Ukraine is not part of the Eurozone, so it has a currency named the hryvnia. A little bit difficult to wrap around an English speaker's tongue, but it's hryvnia. So the hryvnia is being propped up by Western subsidies and loans and all sorts of things that are being given to keep the economy flowing. We tend to think about the military support that the West is giving Ukraine, but a lot of the support is actually just keeping this place afloat when it comes to its finances and economy. And heretofore, touch wood, it remains relatively stable.
Right. Now, I know we're talking with Phil Ittner. I know, Phil, that you maintain contact with friends or correspondents or monitor them anyway in Russia. Is this collapse of the ruble and generally the Russian economy, it appears, softening support for Putin in a way that might have an impact on the war?
It's hard to judge because people don't speak openly, and certainly not with a foreigner on a phone line or even DMing on social media.
Right.
And also, it's just deeply ingrained in the mindset. There's certain things you don't talk about. But I will say that there's a lot of anxiety in what exists of a Russian middle class, and then of course the lower classes. There's a lot of anxiety about what the future holds for them. You got to keep in mind that the recent Russian history has saving the period of Putin's authoritarian dominance, which is what he promised the people of Russia, that there would be stability during his reign. Aside from Putin's era, it's been one upheaval after another for the better part of the last 30, 40, 50 years. So this is they had hoped that things would get better, and it's just not. It's more upheaval. But the thing that really might affect Putin's support is not the people who have a life savings in the tens of thousands of dollars, or of course the lower classes, which are worrying about getting bread. They'll probably still be able to buy bread with their rubles and fresh fruit and all that kind of stuff. But what really is going to affect Putin's leadership, I think, is when you start to talk about people who have mass amounts of holdings in rubles that they've been, and this is why the Russian oligarchy tends to send their money abroad. But they it's not as easy as just doing, making a wire transfer to Geneva. So there are people with massive stockpiles of rubles that they've been bit by bit moving out of the country. But if you can't move it quickly enough, and this collapse has happened, there are a lot of oligarchs, I'm sure, right now who are not very happy with the way things are being run out of the Kremlin.
Right. So what are they doing? Like buying diamonds within Russia with rubles, and then holding the diamonds instead of the rubles, that kind of thing?
Well, you can buy internally within Russia. There are ways to buy it up in commodities, or whether that's gold or diamonds, or something that you can transfer. But obviously, the other thing that they're trying to do is to get their money out of the country, because the ruble's not going to recover anytime soon. So there's a lot of black market stuff going on. There's a lot of illegal transfers going on. Even taking a loss on the ruble as it is, and turning them into euros or what have you, dollars or other currencies, it's well thought, and the reporting is that it's preferred by those oligarchs who have these massive stockpiles of cash to take the loss now, because the economy is not going to get better. That's the folks that I talk to, friends of mine who are inside Russia. And this is something they do kind of talk about is their concerns and their anxiety. But what I really hear from is my expat Russian friends who are either in Israel, or I have a friend I have several friends in the UK and the United States, and they, in talking to their extended families, are saying that there is a lot of concern that this isn't going to get better anytime soon, right, and that the Russian economy is only going to worsen.
And at some point, the average Russian starts saying, this Putin thing isn't working out. And that's the point of maximal danger for Mr. Putin. I opened my program today with a rant about how Trump and the MAGA Republicans in America are following a well-trod path of, promoting kind of a quasi-fascism, strength, virility, masculinity, and that one of the dimensions of this is historically throughout all the way back to Alexander the Great, has been the use of rape in war as a way of intimidating civilian populations, but also asserting the virility and masculinity of the rapists of the country doing it. And I know that there have been reports of rape as a tactic of war being used by Russia in Ukraine. What's the status of that right now? And what's the status of prosecutions around that?
Well, the status of prosecutions is going to be a very long road, especially if you look at, compare it to what happened in, say, the wars in the Balkans. It took years and years.
Well, those took decades to to resolve.
Exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right.
So Jack Smith wrapped them up.
That's right. But then, like guys like Milosevic, was it Milosevic or Mladic, who died in prison? I mean, these guys, they may have died in a prison cell, but they ultimately avoided the justice that really should have been meted out to them. Now, when it comes to using rape, for example, as a weapon of war, it's interesting you bring this up, Tom, because I'm currently working on a vlog, and I hope to have it done by Saturday, on a mental health and suicide call hotline. And one of the things that I spoke to the organizers of the hotline is that they have had to train what they call their consultants, the people who receive these phone calls, that they have to train them now to deal with sexual trauma, sexual violence trauma. And they are now increasingly getting phone calls from people who have either escaped from occupied territories, or even in some cases, people using the online service or calling in still from occupied territories, saying that they are traumatized and considering suicide because of the violence that's been meted out to them, sexually.
In other words, Russian soldiers are raping them.
Are raping them, and then they feel the shame and the guilt. And this is, not obviously this goes into psychosexual and guilt and all sorts of very complex psychological things, which I'm not an expert to deal with. But obviously, as a human being, as we all can probably empathize with, is that this leads to trauma that ultimately can lead to suicide.
Right.
Because of all the stigma that surrounds, rape and sexual violence. So it's not just that the Russians have unleashed, and in some cases it is organized. In some cases it is purposeful, that they go to do this as a way of exerting dominance and spreading fear and terror to subdue the local population. We know this from their own words. Many Russians who have been captured or what have you. This is, their own words saying that we use this on purpose because we want to intimidate the local population. But what it also means for Ukrainians who are a victim of this, and it's male and female, it's children, it's adults, it's old men and women. It is a thing that they do. The Russian occupying forces. It's beyond anecdotal. It's systemic, but the damage that does to a population is hugely significant. And again, I hope to have that vlog out on Saturday, and it's devastating. I spoke to some people who take these calls in, and it was very emotional for them to talk about this, because they're talking to fellow Ukrainians they can't talk to their relatives, so they call an anonymous helpline because they're so traumatized by the sexual violence that's been inflicted on them.
And this is routine in areas that have been taken over by Russians?
Not just routine, systemic, purposeful.
Wow.
That it is by design, not just a mob mentality, but it is actually weaponized and used against local populations to intimidate them and just exert their dominance.
Thank you, Phil. Phil Ittner. Check out his video blog over on YouTube. Philip Ittner, Philipittner. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You can also follow him on X under Ittner Philip, Ittner Philip. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls. And welcome back. Sue in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. Hey, Sue, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm actually calling in response to your discussion about Christianity kind of turning into a Trumpism movement.
Mm-hmm.
And several months ago, when Lauren Boebert had brought up white nationalism and Christian nationalism, I started to equate that with Nazism. So I decided to Google it and see exactly what the definition was. When I did, the first thing that came up were two different sites. One was Choose Truth Over Tribe, and it was talking about 10 signs that you've fallen for Christian nationalism. And it was explaining that Christianity is not Christian nationalism. And it gave me a little bit of hope.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I see a lot of pushback. The United Church of Christ has been, in the forefront of trying to re-Christianize Christianity, bring Jesus back to Christianity, and the Unitarian Church, the Unitarian Universalist Church, which is not a Christian church. I mean, they don't call themselves Christians. Has for years embraced, at least philosophically, pacifism and things like that. And then you've got the non-mainstream churches like, Unity and whatnot that, I think do a pretty good job with Jesus' teachings. I haven't given up on Christianity.
Well, I'm just concerned about why it seems like so many people don't follow the actual tenets of Christianity anymore and then call themselves Christians.
I don't think they're taught.
I mean, they're talking about, division and hatred and racism and bigotry and calling it Christianity. It's so disappointing. And I'm not even, I consider myself agnostic, and I'm upset about it.
When I was a kid, my mom used to take me to church, or my parents used to take me to church. It was my mom pushing it. My dad was an atheist. Although I didn't know that until, the year that he was dying. But looking back. But, the thing that I remember most is my mom was really into Jesus' teachings, and she was the one who introduced me to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 25. And what surprised me was how many sermons I sat through where Jesus was only kind of peripherally mentioned. How little Jesus was taught. And I went through Sunday school for a couple of years too. And in Sunday school, how often, we were studying the Bible, but we weren't studying the teachings of Jesus. And, and this was the church mostly that I was raised in for most of the time that I was a kid was the Church of the Nazarene, which is kind of a right-wing branch of Christianity. And then my parents moved to the United Methodist Church, which is, very solidly kind of mainstream. But even there, I didn't, my sense of it was that there was not as much Jesus as I would have liked. I mean, I saw him as a philosopher who had, the answer for how people can live together, how we can be with each other in ways that are positive and productive. And, it hurts me. It pains me that so much of Christianity today has been reinvented as basically a power cult, a political cult. I think it's real unfortunate. I don't think it's good for Christianity. I don't think it's good for Christians. It's sad. So anyhow, Sue, thank you so much for the call, and thanks for the tip on that website. I'll have to check it out. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stay with us. It's the Thom Hartmann program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. The MAGA Republicans have a plan for America. It involves something called fascism. It's a three-step plan, actually, to take over America and turn us into a fascist state. They're following the example of Vladimir Putin in Russia and Viktor Orban in Hungary. Viktor Orban, who is held up by conservatives as the example of how a country should be run. He came to Texas to give a speech to CPAC and got a standing ovation. So the three steps. Number one, take over the electoral systems and basically rig them along with massive gerrymandering. Number two, build a fascist base by mobilizing hate against minorities, gender minorities, racial minorities, while merging with one of the large factions and the billionaires in the country. And number three, seize control of state power and turn the criminal justice system against your enemies. There's an op-ed about the whole thing over at HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Revealed, the MAGA Republicans' Three-Step Plan for Classic Fascism. Check it out. And welcome back. A couple of other things here I wanted to share with you is that could Donald, first of all, I mentioned, my guess about the counter programming that's going to be happening with the. My guess is that what you're going to see is Donald Trump showing up on next Wednesday during the Republican debate in Georgia. But we'll see. We'll see. But could it be that another Republican candidate for president could be heading for jail? Evan Lowe is a member of the California Assembly, which is their kind of House of Representatives. And he represents the Silicon Valley area. And he has now publicly called for a criminal investigation into Ron DeSantis because DeSantis sent dozens of Latin American immigrants to California this summer. This is according to the Sacramento Bee. Lowe says in a statement that he released day before yesterday, he said, to lie and deceive human beings just trying to survive and support their families in order to transport them unknowingly to California for the purpose of scoring cheap political points is unconscionable. He called this the unauthorized alien transport program. Now DeSantis is coming out and saying, oh no, these people were perfectly happy to get on the airplane. Yeah, like they really understood what was going on. They're political pawns. I have I wrote a piece actually, it seems like it was a month or so ago, but it's at the very top of Raw's story right now. It's titled, the Raw story headline is different than the one I had on it when I originally wrote it. It's called America is Finally Facing Someone Who Has Mussolini's Willingness to See People Die, and It's Not Who You Think. And it's about DeSantis, about how DeSantis is refusing to expand Medicaid in Florida because he's cruel. The idea of millions of Floridians not being able to get basic health care for themselves and their children appears to delight Ron DeSantis and many of his billionaire donors who, they had to sue at the Supreme Court. Now, it wasn't DeSantis, but it was the billionaire donors. Hey, they had to sue at the Supreme Court to punch a hole in Obamacare so that Republican-controlled states didn't have to expand Medicaid, which is insane. I mean, it's just this is so tragic. So, is DeSantis going to be the next Republican going to jail? I don't know. One can hope, right? Stay tuned. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the raid on the Kansas newspaper is getting even weirder. I'll tell you about that right after the break. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929 when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance organisms' ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also extensively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The book is Under the Influence by Robert H. Frank. Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at Hartmann. Check it out. So every time we have an election, I mean, most recently we saw this in 2022, Putin and Mohammed bin Salman, Russia and Saudi Arabia, start raising the price of oil, basically to stick it to the Democrats, hoping that they can lose power. I mean, it worked in 2022. They got their majority in the House of Representatives, And you'll recall all those $6 gasoline and $5 gasoline, and everybody squealing about it, and the little stickers they were putting on pumps with pictures of Joe Biden saying, I did this. Well, they're preparing to do it again. They've cut production, Saudi Arabia and Russia, and it's going to get a whole lot worse over the course of the next year as we're heading toward 2024. So what can we do about this? Well, I have a very specific proposal, and by the way, 70 different environmental groups have joined in this, along with Senator Ed Markey and several members of Congress, and that is to ban the export of American-produced crude oil. Make America energy independent, and we control the price. There's a piece about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So in Kansas, in this newspaper raid, the warrant has been withdrawn. This is absolutely fascinating, absolutely fascinating stuff. The City of Marion, Kansas Police Chief Gideon Cody, who has been justifying this, is now kind of on the outs. The county attorney, Joel Ency, has withdrawn the search warrant and says Cody has to bring back all the computers and everything else. And I mean, who knows what they've done to them up to this point. But he says a careful review says this never should have happened. Right. Well, it turns out that the newspaper was investigating sexual misconduct allegations against the chief of police. That would be, Gideon Cody. And they were looking into whether there was a local restaurant owner had been charged with drunk driving, which would have made it difficult for her to get a liquor license. And they hadn't published either one of these things. These were just tips that they've gotten from the public. And apparently the police wanted to keep those tips from ever going public. Brilliant. All righty, let's pick up your calls here. Leo in Austin, Texas. Hey, Leo, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Leo.
How are you?
I am fine. What's up?
I was hoping to get your insight regarding an issue that I believe is important and has not been touched at all. There is a fact that a significant reason why Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden is because of the poorly handle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And now that has not been brought up again. This is why, one of the reasons why Trump lost. And now we have even more evidence of this. This was not only negligent, but as delinquent.
Well, it goes beyond that. When on April 7th, 2020, the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, and the lead story for all three television networks and all the cable networks was this story that black people were dying in much greater numbers than white people, and that so far all the major clusters of death had been in blue states. And now, at that point, we had been 1 month into the lockdown. The lockdown started on March 11th. This is April 7th. The day afterwards, the day after the story came out, that it was mostly black people in blue states who were dying, Donald Trump changed everything. That was the end of the lockdown. And, and Jared Kushner bragged that they were going to use this to blame Democrats for it.
That's right. That's right. And now we have it on tape.
Yeah.
What's going on behind the curtains?
What specifically are you referring to?
Well, the Woodward tapes, for example.
Oh, yeah, that was back in January when he told Bob Woodward how dangerous this virus was.
Admission that this was done on purpose. That it cannot be blamed on anybody else but Trump. Yeah. And to me, that should be brought up by the justice system and let it play out.
I agree. I agree. The thing is, you're not going to find any Republicans who are going to go along with the perspective that you and I are sharing here, Lee, or Leo. Excuse me. I'm sorry. And the reason why is because they pretty much right across the board have adopted we shouldn't have masks, we shouldn't have lockdowns. It's not a libertarian thing, perspective. So it's kind of problematic. But I agree with you. I've written several op-eds over at HartmannReport.com explicitly saying that Donald Trump and Jared Kushner should be prosecuted for the unnecessary deaths of over 500,000 Americans. I mean, it's a, I realize, you know, Joe Stalin said 1 death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. And you say 500,000 Americans died unnecessarily because of Trump and continue to die. I mean, right now, you've got a 72% increase in COVID in Mississippi. Right now, there's just came out this morning. And why? Because people in Mississippi are following Trump and they're not vaccinated and they're not paying attention and they're not being careful. And, you know, it's crazy. Leo, I've got to move along, but thank you for the call. I think your point is very well made. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I noticed that the Ukrainians are having a lot of success with those motorboat drones against the Russian Black Sea Fleet.
Yeah, that was interesting.
And I was, since our NATO allies, Poland and Romania, each have one Russian-built diesel-electric Kilo-class attack submarine. And, it might be hard for Poland, but Romania is located right there on the Black Sea. I was wondering if they could transfer their Kilo to the Ukrainians. It's kind of difficult to defend against torpedo attacks, and those Russian Kilo-class subs are quiet, and they could roam around the Black Sea, whereas those motorboat drones are really limited in their range.
Wow, you know a lot more about this than I do, George, but assuming that everything you said is accurate, and I have no reason not to believe it, you've always been a good source, I'd love to see that happen. I'm guessing that probably training would be an issue. I mean, Ukraine does not have a submarine fleet, so they don't have submariners.
I looked up the Ukrainian Navy. I don't think they don't have any currently, and I don't know whether they did under the old Soviet Union, but that would be the major problem to overcome, training Ukrainian sailors to on the Kilo class.
Yeah, and if they did, they're probably in Crimea, because that's where, that's the major military base.
Right, and the Russian Navy's been very incompetent. They lost their flagship, the cruiser Moskva, at the beginning of the war, and since then those motorboat drones have damaged several of their ships.
Yeah. It's. Go ahead.
One other quick one. With Philip Ittner, would it be possible to arrange a Q&A with him? I think your audience would find that really informative, and I know they'd like to ask him a lot of questions.
Well, that's an interesting idea.
Because I don't know how the hookup works with him in Kyiv.
Yeah. No, we could do that. Let me discuss it with Sean and Louise, my producers.
Yeah, I think that would be really
my
interesting
bosses.
for our listeners.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that suggestion, George. I'll check it out. George,
and I love listening to your program.
Well, thank you, George. Thank you so much for your kind words, and it's nice to hear from you too. Thank you. Paula in Bartlett, Illinois. Hey, Paula. Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thanks. Project 2025, Heritage Foundation's Project 2025. I don't think enough Americans know about this.
I agree. I agree. In fact, Jim Hightower's newsletter today was, we need to publicize Project 2025. And I made a note to myself that I should be, I wrote an op-ed about this maybe a month ago when it first came out, but it's time to revisit it, because you're right. This is something that was put together by the right-wing billionaires, and they want to end basically any efforts towards greening the American energy system. They want to stop subsidies for green power and for electric cars and things like that. I mean, it's just terrible. It's just terrible what they want to do.
They also want to eliminate the Department of Education, eliminate the FBI, the IRS, the CDC, break down all these institutions, get rid of teachers and teachers' unions, basically eliminate public schools. This has been in the planning for decades. It's chilling. And I just even found out about this 2 weeks ago. And when I even Googled it then versus what I Google now, information has been being taken down, although there's still enough left for you to look it up.
Yeah.
Project 2025. It expands the presidential power so that he's in charge of anything, and it's planned for when the next Republican presidency takes place, and everything would start happening within the first 180 days. That's 6 months.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is not just we're going to kill off the green stuff, and elevate fossil fuels to the godlike status. It's also we're going to make the president essentially a strong man, and that is not the American way.
The Republican candidates are echoing these points.
I agree. Paula, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
It's 44 minutes past the hour. Picking up your phone calls. I'll be right back with you. And welcome back. Kim in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hey, Kim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was just curious. I've been thinking about Trump, and when he gets indicted and goes to jail, people have been saying he's going to jump ship and go to another country.
I suspect that's probably, if he really seriously thinks he's going to go to jail, I'd be astonished if he didn't flee the country.
Yeah. But, you know, don't you think he probably has a tell-all book for all the Republicans that have kissed his fanny if he does get convicted, he is just going to let out everybody's secrets that he's been holding against them?
I don't think he would do that, but I'm guessing that over the next couple of months, as it becomes less toxic or less dangerous for Republicans to come out and speak poorly of Donald Trump, that you're going to hear a lot of stories about Trump rather than from Trump. For example, I mean, he's refusing to pay the legal fees of a number of the people who were just indicted in Georgia. He's not helping out Rudy Giuliani. He's not helping out Sidney, what's her name, Powell. You know, these are people who put their lives on the line for him, who destroyed their reputations for him, and who he had promised he would cover their legal expenses, and now he's not. You know, he had told his followers, if you engage in violence on my behalf, I'll pay for your lawyers. And he's not paying for any of the January 6th lawyers. You know, a lot of these people feel that, like he just left them high and dry. I don't think that this is going to turn out well for him. I really don't.
Yeah.
So.
I just think, though, you know, if I go down, everybody goes down.
Yeah. There you go.
And I feel he'll be telling everything about everybody's secrets that he's been holding.
Oh, it's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. If he can figure out a way to monetize it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm serious, yeah.
There you go. Kim, thank you. Thanks for the point. It's well made. Roosevelt in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Natchitoches. There you go. What's up, Roosevelt?
In Louisiana. Okay, what mine about is that you had this guest on, and he was talking about class. And I told you, man, that gets under my skin because class is what it really means is lower income and higher income. Because I say I had a auntie, she got more class in one finger than Trump got and Putin got in their whole body. So that's my point about class.
I'm missing a word here. I thought you were saying Clarence, but you're not. What is that word? More
Class. People that's higher class and
class.
Lower class.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And this guy was talking about people in the lower class. That's one of our problems.
I get
if
it.
a person got money, we consider them to be higher class, but they're not.
Yeah, no, and I think probably Trump is a classic example of that, although, you know, polite society always kept him at a distance, but...
Right, and just like this guy in the Bible, Solomon, the thing that he did, actually, they should be banned in the Bible because this guy was sticking around with Bathsheba and talking about her breasts and all that. So why not in the Bible? There's a lot of low-class people if you consider
you're right.
what they're doing.
You're absolutely right, Roosevelt. Yeah, there you go. Take it out of the schools. I'm with you. Roosevelt, thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Always great to hear from you. I appreciate it. It's 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. Back in 2010, when Viktor Orban took over the Fidesz party in Hungary, that party was sort of like the Republican Party. It was just a conventional conservative European political party. And he has turned it into a neo-fascist powerhouse. He pushed through he altered the nation's constitution to push through what we would call gerrymandering and voter suppression so that his party will always win. He campaigned on building a wall. Build a wall was literally one of his campaign slogans, and he did build a wall across the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees who were fleeing the violence when Russia was bombing that country. His other two campaign slogans were, and I quote, "Restore Christian purity and make Hungary great again." Seriously, back in 2010, 6 years before Trump. There's an amazing backstory about how Viktor Orban is being cloned, essentially, in the GOP. You can find the article over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Ten minutes before the hour, picking up your calls here. Zeke in Portland. Hey, Zeke, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, you may have missed this. I just happened on it by good fortune on the internet yesterday. It's an article in Newsweek. The United States of America has tens of thousands of HIMARS upgrade rockets in warehouses in Germany waiting to be destroyed at taxpayer expense. According to Dan Rice, who's a graduate of West Point, former Army officer who was instrumental in getting the White House to approve. You may remember in July there was a big hoo-ha about sending cluster munitions, 155 millimeter artillery shells to Ukraine, and everybody, a lot of people, not everybody, were wringing their hand. Oh, we can't do this because it's going to be a danger to civilians, et cetera, et cetera. The upgrade HIMARS rockets are designed to kill artillery. Now, the Russians call artillery the god of war. It has always been, if you know anything about their order of battle, it is all built around artillery. And they have thousands of artillery pieces raining death and destruction down on the Ukrainians, who have been slowed way down by the fortifications and the mining that has been done over the last better part of a year.
Right.
The so-called Surovikin line. Okay, according to Dan Rice, this guy, he's a former American officer. If he were ordered to take his troops into battle without this weapon that I'm talking about, he would not do it. He would resign his commission.
Right, the HIMARS. So are you saying that we're withholding, because we have given HIMARS weaponry to Ukraine, have we not? I'm certain I've heard that before.
Yeah, we have given HIMARS, and this is part of from my perspective, this is part of the beauty of it. The HIMARS rocket launchers are already in Ukraine. What they don't have in Ukraine is this upgrade missile that has a range of 28 miles as opposed to 15 miles.
Do they use the same launchers?
They use the same launchers. The launchers are there, ready to go.
So why aren't we giving them the ones that we have in Germany that we're going to destroy? Are they obsolete? Are they unreliable because they're old?
Not. Yeah, you're asking really, really good questions, Tom. And I'll tell you, I have believed for some time that Biden and Blinken have no intention of allowing Russia to lose this war. They have, Biden,
they're fighting for a stalemate. They're afraid that if he loses, it'll start a nuclear war or something. Is that where you're going with this, Zeke?
That is probably what they're thinking. I mean, every time Putin or his little butt boy, Dmitry Medvedev, 5'4" Dmitry Medvedev, waves a nuke in their face, Blinken and Biden have to run off and change their depends.
I wouldn't say that. They have stood up to that, and they in fact they've ridiculed. Blinken has ridiculed some of those comments, about we're gonna threaten you with nukes. I don't think it's terrifying them. But But I do understand the idea that if, Putin knows that if he loses in Ukraine, he's going to be killed by his own people. It's going to be the end, not just of his political career, it's going to be the end of his life. And so, postponing his demise, well, let me rephrase that. And if he thinks his actual personal life is in danger, he would be perfectly willing, in my opinion, to kill millions of people with nuclear weapons, maybe even tens or hundreds of millions of people. And, I think a rational leadership of the United States would want to try to avoid that, don't you think, Zeke?
What, you're telling me that if Putin thinks he's going down, he's going to nuke the planet? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that he would probably start by using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, which he's already talked about doing. My theory is that he would launch them out of Belarus and he would blame it on the Wagner Group so that he had some plausible deniability. And then and Europe are confronted, NATO is then confronted with the crisis. What do we do in response to the use of a nuclear weapon? If we don't do anything, we've just ratified.
Well,
go ahead.
Are you aware of Senate Resolution 268?
I'm not by name. Fill me in.
Okay. Well, it simply says that if any tactical nukes are used on Ukraine by Russia, it will be considered an attack on NATO. Article 5 will be invoked, and Russia will be at war with NATO.
Oh, interesting.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I don't think so either, and that's my point. I'm not taking a position here, Zeke. Please be clear. I'm not saying that. I think we should, drag this war out. I would love to see the war end, and I would love to see Putin decisively defeated. But if the strategy is, let's hope that Putin gets deposed before the war ends, and that is the thing that ends the war, that would be a more desirable end to the war than ending the war on military terms and causing, and that provoking, or nearly ending the war on military terms, and that provoking Putin into the use of nuclear weapons. I mean, this has got to be keeping people at the State Department and the Pentagon up at night. It's certainly, I wouldn't want to be in the position of having to make these decisions.
Well, with all due respect, Tom, you're contradicting yourself. You were saying a few minutes ago that Blinken has kind of heaped scorn on this whole idea, of Russia and their nukes.
Yep.
And now you're telling me we can't have Ukraine win because
no, I'm not telling you that. I'm saying I understand both. Both of these arguments are very clear to me, and I don't know which is the best. I have no idea. I'm not a military strategist. But, I see these arguments, I understand, I hear, I get these arguments, Zeke. And I think your points are very, very well made. I don't have any easy answers here. I don't think there are any easy answers. Zeke, thank you for the call. Thanks for a thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation. I appreciate it. We're hitting the top of the hour here. We'll be back on the other side. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
If you're a corporate employee.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air. So you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Under the Influence, Putting Peer Pressure to Work by Robert H. Frank. And I'm reading from the prologue. That we are more closely connected to one another than most of us realize is an old idea. An important variation dates from 1929, when Hungarian writer Frigyes Karinthy published a short story entitled Chains. Two of the story's main characters speculate that any two living people can be connected by a chain involving no more than 5 acquaintances. That some such chains exist is hardly surprising, since most of us can think of people in distant locations to whom we're connected through a small number of intermediaries. The man bites dog aspect of Karinthy's conjecture is that almost any two people, A and E, could be linked by a chain like A knows B, B knows C, C knows D, who knows E. One of the first systematic attempts to test this claim came in the 1960s with a series of experiments by the psychologist Stanley Milgram. In it, he sent packages containing a small booklet to 96 people chosen at random from the Omaha, Nebraska telephone directory. His cover letter asked them to try to forward the booklet to a specific residence of Boston, Massachusetts, through a chain of personal acquaintances. He told them the name and address of the Boston resident, that he worked as a stockbroker, and that the first person in their chain should be somebody they knew on a first-name basis. Milgram also advised them to choose someone they believed, presumably based on the target's location and occupation, could be socially closer to the target than they were themselves. Subsequent recipients in the chain were asked to forward the same instructions. Many of the Omaha recipients undoubtedly tossed Milgram's booklet in the trash, so it's remarkable that the Boston target received 18 of the 96 packages. The average number of links in the 18 chains was 5.9. But the now familiar expression 6 degrees of separation would not gain broad currency until many years later, when John Guare's play by that name premiered on Broadway in 1990. The concept became a meme in full when 4 Albright College students introduced 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon in 1994, a game designed to measure the professional proximity of an actor, living or dead, to the American film star Kevin Bacon. An actor has a Bacon number of 1, for example, if he or she appeared in the same film with Bacon. Someone who appeared in a film with another actor who appeared in a film with Bacon has a Bacon number of 2, and so on. The average Bacon number is 2.95 among actors who have one. In that group, even the actor most distant from Bacon, William Rufus Shafter, has a Bacon number of only 7. Shafter, a Union Army officer during the Civil War, appeared in 2 films in 1898. For academics who study social connectedness, the 6 degrees concept gained little traction until 1998. That's when the sociologist Duncan Watts and the mathematician Steve Straga published their landmark paper, Collective Dynamics of Small World Networks in Nature. In the years since then, this paper has provided the mathematical foundation for the analytical tools that social scientists have been using with such remarkable success to study how ideas and behaviors spread through populations like infectious diseases. It has already been cited by other scholars more than 38,000 times and is one of the few papers ever published to be among the most widely cited works in multiple disciplines. In his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene, the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the term meme, which Webster now defines as an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. The meme is to cultural transmission, Dawkins argued, as the gene is to biological transmission. One of Charles Darwin's central insights was that natural selection favors genetic variations that enhance the individual organism's ability to survive and reproduce. Much of the time, the same variations also benefit larger groups, but often not. For example, an inclination to cheat when no one's looking might benefit individuals, but widespread cheating almost always makes matters worse for groups. It is the same with memes. The memes that propagate most successfully are often ones that benefit both individuals and groups. But here too, not always. As the legal scholar Jeffrey Stake has argued, ideas should not be treated as inert products, but as living things that sometimes exert some influence over their environment. Some of the ideas are more adept at surviving than others, and the ones that survive will not necessarily be good for humans. It is often hard to evaluate whether a specific behavior even qualifies as a meme, and if so, whether its consequences on balance are positive or negative. Yet sometimes the evidence is clear. We know, for example, that the strongest predictor of whether people will take up smoking is the proportion of their close friends who smoke. Smoking is thus clearly a meme. The negative health consequences of smoking are also conclusively documented, and most smokers themselves express regret over having started. By definition, then, smoking unambiguously qualifies as a socially destructive meme. On the other side of the ledger, we have compelling evidence that the adoption of photovoltaic solar panels is both socially contagious and almost uniformly positive in terms of environmental consequences. Accordingly, few would object to calling the practice a socially beneficial meme. Adam Smith, widely considered the father of economics, is often cited in defense of the claim that competitive markets produce the greatest good for the greatest number. The book is Under the Influence by Robert H. Frank.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. A couple stories here I want to share with you, and then I'll pick up your calls. A 13-year-old girl has emerged. This is a crazy alert, I suppose, but really kind of a, geez, scratching my head, religion alert, I don't know what. There was this fellow by the name of Potsman, Michael Protzman, excuse me, who was the leader of a QAnon faction that believed that John Kennedy was still alive and or was going to be, who's like over 100 years old now if he had lived, and that his son was going to show up. And, you know, they held a vigil down in Dallas, remember, for a couple of weeks waiting for John Kennedy, right there at the, you know, where he was assassinated by the overpass on the grassy knoll and all that stuff. So he was the leader of that faction. And there was this 13-year-old girl who they referred to as Tiny Teflon. That's her kind of, you know, online name, essentially, who was his protege. And he had groomed her to be a QAnon spokesperson. And he had her fill in for him and whatnot, you know, in speaking about these things. And then he died. He died in a dirt bike wreck in Minnesota a few months back, and she has taken over this branch of this 13-year-old girl has taken over this branch of the QAnon cult, and is running his Telegram channel. She has tens of thousands of followers, and her listeners are. And she says that, you know, her goal is to indoctrinate the children of America. And her listeners are apparently quite excited, and many of them are offering up their own children and saying, here, talk to my kids, please. This is not healthy, my friends. Somebody needs to do, like, you know, trot out one of those documentaries on Jim Jones, and because this is just not healthy. Meanwhile, Mifiprestone, the abortion drug, the drug that will produce an abortion, typically combined with a second drug that also starts with an M, but I can't recall the actual name of it. But, you know, usually it's a two-drug combination, but Mifiprestone is the main part of it. This is the drug that Matthew Kaczmarek, the right-wing religious fundamentalist nut, who Republicans work so hard to get, and the Federalist Society as well, to get on the bench as a federal district court down in Texas, in Amarillo. And then they brought this Mifiprestone lawsuit to him specifically. They filed it in Amarillo so that he would be the only judge who would see it, knowing that he wanted to ban abortion nationwide. And so what he did is he said, this drug cannot be allowed in the United States. And he literally banned it nationwide. That ban was immediately stayed by the Fifth Circuit, which is very conservative. But the Fifth Circuit said, okay, let us look at this first. And then also by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, wait a minute. Everything's going to stay the same until we've had a chance to look at this. Well, the Fifth Circuit ruled on this day before yesterday. Or yesterday afternoon. It was a 3-judge panel. One of the judges actually wrote a dissent saying that he wanted to ban Mifiprestone nationwide, period, right now. Right. But the other 2 judges said, no, we're going to, this is the appeals court that covers Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, Fifth Circuit. And it was a 2-to-1 ruling. They tossed out Kaczmarek's order and replaced it with restrictions. What they're saying is that Mifiprestone cannot be sent through the mail and must be prescribed by a medical doctor, and the prescription must be filled in person at a pharmacy. And the pharmacist, by the way, can refuse to fill the prescription. Now, what this would do is dramatically change the dynamic right now in the United States. You've got women in states that have outlawed abortion, which is about half our states now, the Republican-controlled states. I think pretty much every single one of the red states has outlawed abortion to greater or lesser degrees. Women in those states, however, even though it's against the law, are still able to get Mifiprestone through the mail. And in the early stages of pregnancy, in those states that only have 6-week bans or 10-week bans or 12-week bans, they can get Mifiprestone before that. What this would do is make it almost impossible to get it through the mail in those states that have outlawed abortion. So it would cut off access to the safest and most convenient and least dangerous form of abortion for women in about half of the states in America. Now, it has not gone into effect yet because the Supreme Court says, wait a minute, we want to look at this. But God only knows what's going to happen on the Supreme Court, because you've got 8 Catholics on the court. And on the conservative side, you've got 6 Catholics. I realize Neil Gorsuch no longer attends a Catholic church. He goes to the Church of England with his wife, but his wife's church, but he was raised Catholic. And, Catholic doctrine is that Mifiprestone is evil, along with birth control and condoms and everything else, but that it's murder. So how's this going to play out before the Supreme Court? Nobody knows. But for the moment, it's still around. Mifiprestone is still around, but I'm not holding my breath. The Judge Elrod is a George Bush appointee, and Judge Corey Wilson is a Trump appointee. They are the 2 who said, we're going to do it this way, with restrictions rather than a total ban. Judge James Ho dissented and said that he would have affirmed Kaczmarek's order in full, including halting Mifiprestone altogether in the United States. Pretty incredible stuff. Jared Kushner's income sources are shocking political analysts. Steve Ratner is an MSNBC political analyst, a financial guy, and regular guest on Morning Joe on the MSNBC morning program. And he did a breakdown of where Jared Kushner's $3 billion came from. And $2 billion of it came from Saudi Arabia. But apparently and $200 million came from the United Arab Emirates, and $200 million came from Qatar, and $625 million came from other non-U.S. countries. And only, $20 million came from, $31 million came from sources inside the United States. Out of $3 billion, only 31 million came from 1%. And Steve Ratner is like, I've never seen this before. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. This guy used his connections in the White House in a big way to make himself insanely rich. And the Republicans are hysterical about Hunter Biden? Seriously? I want to know why the Senate's not investigating this. The Senate is controlled by Chuck Schumer, by the Democrats. Why are they not investigating Jared Kushner right now? If you would like, if you share my curiosity, if you also want to know why Jared Kushner's not being investigated in the United States Senate right now, you can call Chuck Schumer at 202-224-3121. They will put you right through. It's coming up on 15 minutes past the hour. I have to tell you about how the Montana youth victory in the climate case yesterday or the day before, I guess it was the day before yesterday, how that might be spreading. And this is really good news for the climate and for all Americans. I'll get to that on the other side of this break, and I'll be picking up your calls, so stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, sorry, the Supreme Court got that one wrong. And welcome back. And let's see here. Wilmus in Elroy, Wisconsin. Am I saying that right? Yeah, Elroy, Wisconsin. Hey, Wilmus, what's up?
Yep. Hi. I just wanted to respond to that other lady from Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, that she was talking about the white Christian nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
And the reasoning why there's quite a few pastors here in Wisconsin, one down in Madison for a fact, and he used to be a Republican, and he's originally from Texas. And he even said that white Christian nationalism is wrong. And there's quite a few pastors here that also say it's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because it's a form of idolatry.
Explain.
It's a form of idolatry because of scriptures in the Bible about how, how they're putting Trump like their idol.
Right, and I know the story of the golden calf and the first commandment and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the aspect of white Christian nationalism that essentially deifies Donald Trump is idolatry.
Right.
But more broadly speaking, would you say that white Christian nationalism in and of itself is idolatry, or it's just not? It's just anti-Christian, the idea of discriminating against anybody after Jesus's riff about the Samaritan.
Exactly, right.
Yeah. Okay.
What you just said is exactly right.
Good.
It is not Christian.
Okay.
And there's a lot, and I'm also a pastor and a theologian, and I've been doing my Bible studies and studying my Bible and Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And even my professor at the Bethesda Theological Institute said that white Christian nationalism is wrong.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is wrong. And also, Tom, keep pushing Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46.
There you go.
Very good.
Yep, the parable of the sheep and the goat.
And so, right. Keep pushing it.
Thank you, Wilmus. Wilmus,
and I agree.
Go ahead. Do you want to say something else, or is that it?
No, I just wanted to say that I agree with what you're saying.
Thank
about,
you very much, Wilmus. I want to get another caller in here. Thank you. Chip in Lawrence, Kansas. Hey, Chip, what's up?
Thank you for taking my call. Good to talk to you again. And greetings from Lawrence, Kansas, the only really decent progressive community in all Kansas. It's a little dot of blue and a sea of crimson.
Yeah.
Crimson. I got a question. Do you actually think if Trump escapes the country, like you and that young lady were talking about earlier, that he'll be welcomed? Because he's used up. He will not have any value.
Well, that's a good question.
Some of these dictators
Idi
Amin,
when I was in working in Uganda in 1980, Idi Amin had just been welcomed by Saudi Arabia because he converted to Islam. And they built a palace for him and his 29 wives, I think he had, that he brought with him. So, maybe Donald Trump would have to convert to Islam in order to be accepted by Saudi Arabia. I think probably Putin would welcome him just to stick it to the United States. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe some of the kind of low-rent countries. I mean, the Philippines, they're moving fascist rapidly. Maybe they would take him in. I don't know. It's a good question, Chip.
Thank you.
We'll just toss it out there and let other people weigh in on it, okay? Chip, thanks a lot for the call. It's good to hear from you. We'll be right back, 19 minutes past the hour. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it, and, you know, went to school, and things got busy, and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Welcome back, 21 minutes past the hour. So just a quick story here, and then I'll pick up your calls. I reported, let's see, it was the 14th, I guess it was a couple days ago, that the 16 young Montanans ranging from 5 to 22 years old sued Montana and won because the Montana Constitution has a provision in it that says that all Montana citizens, Montanans, are entitled to a healthy and safe environment. Now, a lot of state constitutions around the country were amended to say this back in the 70s, you know, when the Earth Day and all that stuff came out of the 70s. There was this whole environmental movement. You know, it started in the late 60s with, it really started with Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's book. In 1966, I think that book was published, or within a year of that. But by the 70s, it was a big deal. And the lawsuit says that the state's efforts to promote fossil fuels are a violation of the state's constitution because the state's constitution guarantees a clean and healthful atmosphere, and fossil fuels do not produce a clean and healthful atmosphere. If you don't believe me, just go inhale the fumes from the tailpipe of your car for a good 5 minutes and call me back. Haha, right? You won't be called, obviously. We don't want to be doing this to the planet. So it turns out that although the U.S. Constitution doesn't have, these are called green amendments, doesn't have a green amendment, a number of other states do. Back in the 70s, Pennsylvania, Montana, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and Illinois all amended their constitutions to have these green provisions. And since 2022, New York has added a green provision. So currently, currently there's a whole bunch of states that are considering green provisions. Now, this lawsuit may cause at least those states that are under Republican control to reconsider these green provisions in their constitution. But so far, these are the states that have it in their legislatures right now. Arizona, Connecticut, Iowa, Kentucky, Maine, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Washington, and West Virginia. So I see this as positive news, as good news, as a good, positive, progressive step. Good stuff. All right, let's pick up your calls here and see what's on your mind today. Robin in Eugene, Oregon. Hey, Robin, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I was wondering, I've got a Republican friend, and he suggested that I change my affiliation from Democrat to Republican and in order to vote against Trump in the primaries. How do you feel about that?
I believe Oregon does have closed primaries, don't we?
Yes, I do believe we do.
Yeah. Well, it's an idea. I don't think that the Oregon primary is going to have much impact on the national race.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not sure it would be worth the effort, frankly. You know, I don't disagree with the sentiment, though. I mean, it's
yeah, I know. I was just hoping, I guess.
Yeah. I personally, I wouldn't go through the hassle, but you know, if you were really passionate about it.
I've always been Democrat, though. I find it very difficult to change.
Yeah.
You know.
Plus your name gets pushed into databases, and suddenly you'll be on the receiving end of a whole bunch of fundraisers, which might be interesting. I don't know. Might be interesting. Robin, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. It's a great question. Thank you. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good morning, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
It's been a while since we've talked. I have a big concern with the Democratic Party right now as far as the no label with Joe Manchin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bringing back old memories of Ralph Nader. And to me, it's a terrible moment.
Yeah.
And we need to, they need to get behind Joe Biden all the way instead of trying to stir the pot.
Yeah,
that's what happens with Democrats. It seems like they never know how to support their president. You know, they don't seem to care enough to see what's going on with the country.
Yeah,
I think could ruin it.
Well, maybe not. I wrote an op-ed about this that was published yesterday, and you know, produced a minor explosion. Go read my Twitter feed. All these people trashing me, saying, "Oh, you're just a toady for the corrupt Democratic Party," and all this kind of. No, you know, what I'm saying is, you know, if you live in a solidly red or a solidly blue state, feel free to vote for Cornel West. God bless him. He's a good guy. But if you live in a swing state, you're throwing your vote away. And it's just not, it doesn't make good sense. We do not have a parliamentary system in the United States, and at the national level, we don't have instant runoff voting. So third-party candidates always hurt the party they're closest to. You know, I don't understand, well, I do understand, why so many Americans are ignorant of this simple reality that America has first past the post winner take all elections, and the rest of the world pretty much has parliamentary systems where, you know, if the Green Party gets 6% of the vote, they get 6% of the seats in Parliament. That is not how it works in America. So, John, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. It's kind of, in some ways, it's disheartening to see people so sadly malinformed, misinformed, and then to see, you know, politicians, people like now, you know, Cornel West, promoting that lack of understanding. It's really kind of tragic.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Talk Media for the rest of us. I'll be back with your calls right after this break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today we're reading about Thunderdome politics, an uncivil war taking back our democracy in an age of Trumpian disinformation and Thunderdome politics by Greg Sargent, the Washington Post columnist. This is from his chapter on voter suppression. It's page 37. Republicans and Democrats inhabit different political realities, as mentioned in a previous chapter. But there are certain facts about our politics that are just objectively true. One of them is this. Generally speaking, efforts to make it harder to vote are almost always pushed by Republicans. You cannot understand what is happening in American politics right now without recognizing this stark and very fundamental difference between the two major political parties. During this decade, procedural hurdles were put into place in around 20 states that in some manner or other have made it harder to vote or to register to vote, or have undone previous efforts to make voting or registering easier, or have otherwise threatened serious disenfranchisement. Most of them were the creation of Republican lawmakers and officials. The difference in the two parties' national platforms for 2016 tells the story. The GOP platform champions additional hurdles that are absurdly disproportionate to the phantom abuse it alleges, while the Democratic platform champions multiple specific ways to make it easier to vote, not harder. The most common and controversial of methods used by Republicans to suppress Democratic turnout is the requirement that would present identification at the polls. The game here tends to turn on requiring forms of ID that some groups are less likely to have, making participation harder for them. Other restrictions include techniques like cutting back on early voting and making it harder to register, both of which have, in recent years, been instituted in multiple states. Republicans who have passed laws making it harder to vote have tended to claim such measures are necessary to protect against, quote, voter fraud. We'll look at this in more detail below, but for now, note that most of the states that have passed such measures did so while under Republican control. As New York University political scientist Samuel Isikoff has memorably put it, the single predictor necessary to determine whether a state will impose voter access restrictions is whether Republicans control the ballot access process. Scholars trace the modern era of warfare over election rules to the intensely contested presidential election of 2000, in which a divided Supreme Court halted the recount in Florida, throwing the presidency to George W. Bush. The closeness and partisan acrimony of that contest, combined with the intense national focus on election rules that accompanied the court battle over it, helped persuade both parties to invest much more attention and energy on those rules. As a result, both the implementation of measures restricting the ballot and the legal battles over them have intensified in recent years. A brief glance at the surprising history of voter ID laws begins to tell the story of this tightening. In the 1970s, several states implemented voter ID measures, but all of them provided for ways that voters without the proper ID could cast a ballot. By 2000, there were 14 such laws, and they had been implemented by politicians in both parties. But by the mid-2000s, amid rising post-2000 acrimony, a handful of red states began implementing voter ID laws that the nonpartisan National Conference of State Legislatures described as, quote, strict, meaning that they make it easy to disqualify those who don't pass muster. After one of those laws in Indiana was challenged and then upheld in 2008 by the Supreme Court, an escalation began that gained momentum in the Obama era. From 2010 onward, the adoption of voter ID laws in general and of strict ones in particular accelerated. Though a handful were blocked in the courts, as of this writing, a total of 34 states have voter ID laws in effect, 24 that are deemed non-strict and 10 that are deemed strict. The strict ones are in red states or in swing states where they were implemented by Republicans. The story is very similar if you evaluate the state's voting rules in a broader way, by including not just voter ID measures, but also cutbacks to early voting and restrictions on registration. Here the trend is just as pronounced. After the 2010 elections, the Brennan Center for Justice documented a sharp rise in efforts to pass such measures in the state legislatures across the country. Not all these efforts bore fruit, but many did. By the time voting took place in Election Day 2016, some 14 states had these new restrictions in place for the first time in a presidential election. Now, as of this writing, by the Brennan Center's count, some 20 states have successfully implemented either strict voting ID requirements or cutbacks to early voting or restrictions on registration or other measures with meaningful disenfranchising effects. If you're a liberal who's frustrated by the seemingly unbreakable Republican dominance of national politics, not to mention GOP control of most state governments across the country, then the chances are that these restrictions figure heavily into your explanation of this GOP supremacy. Indeed, social media has been absolutely saturated in recent years with variations of the lament that Republican political dominance is largely maintained through a combination of nefarious and undemocratic tactics, such as ballot restrictions that keep constituencies unfriendly to the GOP from voting, and extreme gerrymanders that have, in effect, built a fortress around the GOP's majority in the House of Representatives. Democrats frequently invoke the GOP's use of these tactics, often justifiably, to raise money and to galvanize turnout. This narrative contains some important truths. Some of the forms that these restrictions on voting access have taken in recent years are diabolically obvious in their efforts to keep constituencies supportive of Democrats from voting. Still others boast the distinction of being more insidiously designed and thus less actions. The book is An Uncivil War by Greg Sargent of the Washington Post. International trade policy to immigration policy to housing. We've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. It's 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here you picking up your calls. Fred in Long Beach, California. Hey, Fred, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's
Hi.
up?
Hey, Tom, a couple of things. You just said something about if you live in a swing state, you vote for a third-party candidate, you're throwing your vote away. I would actually disagree. I'd say if it's a swing state, you're pretty much voting for. It's almost like a vote for Trump if you waste your vote on a third-party candidate because it's that close.
That was my
but
point.
Anyway, what I wanted to bring up was your previous caller cited Newsweek as his source. And I thought, wait a minute. I looked it up, and 3 years ago tomorrow, there's an article that Alex Shepard wrote in the New Republic called Newsweek and the Rise of the Zombie Magazine, how a decaying legacy magazine is being used to launder right-wing ideas and conspiracy theories. And basically, they had John Eastman wrote an article about Kamala Harris's qualifications to run for office, saying that because her parents were immigrants, she wasn't qualified to run. Right. And Trump then cited that. So Newsweek magazine is just not, a credible source anymore.
Yeah, let me give you a little backstory here, Fred. 3-4 years ago, it was up for sale. It was in deep financial trouble. And there was a fellow who was a progressive who was quite wealthy who was planning on buying it. And he reached out to me and asked me if I would be a columnist. And I said, sure. He ended up not winning the bidding war, as it were. And it went apparently to a right-winger because for a while Newsweek was publishing kind of fringe stuff, like you said, John Eastman. I've noticed over the last year or two that more and more stories that have more of a progressive tilt to them have been showing up in Newsweek. So I'm not sure if it changed ownership again or if the ownership decided, that they weren't really ideological. They were just looking for profit and they decided there was more profit to be made on the left. Or if it's just that I'm catching the progressive stories because that's what I'm searching for and they're also running conservative stories. I just don't know the status of Newsweek right now. But I do know that the old line, Newsweek and Time were just, mainstream publications and, everything is triple fact checked and, just the facts, ma'am, and all that kind of stuff. That's gone, I think, by and large.
Right.
So.
Hey, can I make one more point about Fox News?
Yeah.
And I know, because there's no more fairness doctrine, FCC has really no way to police them.
Well, the FCC never had control over Fox News because they're on cable.
Right. No, but I'm just saying.
Theoretically
general,
they did, because they do have the power to regulate cable, but they don't exercise that power.
So, considering the result, you look at Dominion voting and how they deliberately, spread falsehoods, which they acknowledge. It really isn't becoming news anymore. I call it Fox Tales. They're making up stories. So, couldn't the Federal Trade Commission say you're mislabeling yourself?
Arguably, but I guarantee you that the federal government and the Biden administration do not want to get into that battle, number one. And number two, free speech has been rigorously protected by the Supreme Court throughout its history. And the one sector of free speech that is most ferociously defended by the Supreme Court is political free speech, which includes lies, And so, when I refer to Fox in my writing, I always put the word news in quotation marks. And whenever I refer to it on the air, I refer to it as Fox so-called news. Because, it's not news. I mean, they've got a couple of reporters there that sort of do news, but they are, reporting on things that are kind of spun toward the right. And I don't have a problem with people offering opinion and offering opinion on the news. It's what I do for a living. But I don't pretend that this show is the news. I mean, it's like, you want the news, go to Amy Goodman, on the left. She does news. I don't do news, I do opinion. I talk about the news. And I think Fox should just be honest. I think it's real unfortunate that they're just not honest about who and what they are. But, we've had, 30 years of them now? They started in the mid-90s. I think people have figured it out by this point. So, Fred, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Good points all. Thank you. Tony in Cheshire, Oregon. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
I wanted to talk about how to possibly stop the export of American oil and get the whole country behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I find when I talk to my right-wing associates, if I speak any more than bumper stickers speak, their eyes kind of glaze over, and you've totally lost them. You're talking about the Green New Deal or progressive taxes or whatever. So my thought is, if we just had a bumper sticker that said something like "American oil for Americans," and to the guy that makes bumper stickers, he can have that idea.
Yeah, get that, Ziggy. Ziggy's the guy who makes the bumper stickers. Yeah, I like it.
Right,
I like it. We oddly enough, if you want to talk about the politics of this, Richard Nixon was the guy who pushed through the law that banned the export of American-produced oil, and Barack Obama was the guy who oversaw ending that law. So this should not be a partisan issue, in my opinion. I think Obama made a mistake. Yeah. He was responding to pressure from the fossil fuel industry, from the domestic fossil fuel industry, and I don't think we should be exporting fossil fuels. We're just jacking up so these companies. So yeah, I'm with you.
Right. Or we could just nationalize.
Yeah. I'm all in favor of that. I've written about this many times that, for less than the cost of Trump's tax cuts for billionaires, we could have bought all four of the major oil companies in the United States, go out in the stock market and buy them in the open market, and then, fire their current management, stop them from funding right-wing politicians, and stop them from funding climate change denial organizations. I'm all in favor of that. Tony, thank you. Excellent call. Thank you. Kenneth in Oakland, California. Hey, Kenneth, what's on your mind today?
How you doing? I've been listening to you for like maybe 15, 20 years before the advent, of the act, Progressive Voices and all that. And I listened to you about an hour, in the last hour, make the comment about contacting Chuck Schumer.
Right.
And it said, well, you always say at the end of the show, tag your it. So I gave old Chucky a call.
Oh, what happened?
And I left a comment. I said, all this hoopla about Hunter Biden, why not, look into Trump's son-in-law? Where did he get that money from? What did he do to get the money? You got to, take advantage of that.
Right. So when you called, you got a voicemail box, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I didn't get a representative. I didn't get whoever answers the phone.
Right.
Not to leave a message. I was kind of disappointed by that, but, it is what it is.
Well, it may be because you don't have a 212 phone number, too, or a New York State area code on your phone number.
Yeah, I'm clear on the other side of the country. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
So there you go. But good. I'm glad. Kenneth, if you get any follow-up from him, give us a shout and let us know what happened, would you?
Definitely. I also wanted to add, when you came to Berkeley to do your book tour on the Second Amendment, I was there. I was probably one of the few black people in the crowd.
I remember that.
About the book.
Oh, I remember you too. Well, thank you, Kenneth. It was nice meeting you.
Awesome. All right.
Appreciate
Have a
the
nice
call.
weekend, man.
Okay, thank you. You too, Kenneth. Alex in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Great show.
Thank you.
Earlier today, I was looking around for just jobs in politics, just on Google. And I happened to stumble across a bunch of ones for Fox Corporation. So I was curious, so I checked it out. And I noticed that at the bottom of their job postings, they have a couple paragraphs about DEI and how they're an equal opportunity employer and they value diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And not only that, they require vaccination.
Yep, it's exactly the same type of thing. Why do they push?
Fox is woke.
They push all this anti-stuff.
Yeah.
And then when you go get a job from them, they tell you all about DEI. I mean,
yeah,
seems pretty hypocritical to me.
It is. It is. And I suspect if Fox TV viewers knew what Fox corporate does, that they would be shocked. But they're not going to learn about it from Fox News. So, what can you say? But Alex, thanks for pointing that out. It is an amazing thing, isn't it? And thank you for the call. It's 44 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann program. Speaking the truth, Fox News would really rather you didn't know all about. Stay with us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's talk media for the rest of us. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Greg in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Greg, thanks for watching us on Free Speech. What's up?
How you doing, Tom? Everything's great down here in Jacksonville. A lady called a few minutes ago about maybe switching over from the Democratic voting over to Republican.
Right,
and that's
to vote
a
in the
bad
primary.
idea. Yeah, it's a bad idea because, sure, you vote against Trump, but now you're stuck over there having only to choose between Republicans in the primaries. What about the Democrats in the primaries that you could have voted for? Florida's a perfect example. For instance, had Nikki Fried won the primary, she might have been a better candidate.
Oh, that's a good point. You know, it's not the top of the ticket stuff that's really all that important. It's the down ticket stuff. That's a really good point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned it before on another talk show. I tried to call in, but the producer didn't see my side of the story.
Huh.
But I'm glad you let me speak about it.
I completely agree with you. The primaries, you know, your primaries for House and Senate candidates, state and national and federal are those are important primaries, and you don't want to give those up.
Imagine if Florida did have DeSantis as governor right now.
Right. Well, and also, you know, consider that this person is a progressive who was being told by a conservative to register as a Republican, which means that would be one less progressive vote for a progressive candidate for in the Democratic primary. You know, because we've had, I mean, one of the problems we have here in Oregon is we have a few Democrats who are not progressives. They're basically corporate Democrats.
Exactly.
So yeah,
and say that's actually a vote for the corporate Democrat.
That's right. That's right. That's an excellent point, Greg. I wish I had thought of that.
And one other thing.
Thank you for bringing it up.
One other thing about DeSantis. DeSantis isn't trying to run right of Trump. DeSantis means what he says.
Yeah.
He is from Northeast Florida. Actually, he's from Jacksonville. And the money that backs him, they believe exactly what DeSantis is saying. He's not going to change his tune.
They want a fascist state, basically.
Especially in Northeast Florida. That's why they have the Civil War reenactments all the time. They're still fighting the Civil War.
Yeah, I get it. So, Greg, as a Floridian who's obviously paying close attention to politics and has some wisdom around this, what do you think the chances are that DeSantis is going to get reelected? I'm assuming he's not going to be the presidential nominee, but get reelected as governor.
He probably will be. It depends on the candidate, the Democratic candidate. Because remember, Charlie Crist was the candidate he ran against, which was an ex-Republican.
Right. So the first time he won, he ran against a black man, if I'm recalling correctly.
And it was very close.
Right.
It was very close.
Right. And the second time he won, he ran against a former Republican who had become a Democrat. So in neither case,
he mopped the floor with him.
So in both cases, he had an edge, just a little, shave a point or two edge, and that was how he won. Perhaps. I mean, who knows? But Greg, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Minutes before the hour, picking up your calls here. Bernice in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Bernice, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Greg, a second ago was just brilliant. That was a great point. I think we need to rethink the strategy of voting third party if we live in a solidly blue or swing state because of the Republican machinations. They, we don't think like they do. I think there are election corruption plans in the making right now that we can't even imagine. And who knows what would happen, unless it's an overwhelming vote for our candidate.
I agree. I think that the stakes are so high that we can't afford voting for what are essentially vanity candidates.
Right. Yeah. And any of these, manipulations like voting, registering Republican or whatever, I don't know. I think it comes back to bite us. Yeah.
And Biden's done a damn good job. So, and Kamala Harris has been a very good vice president.
Yes, there was nothing on TV, on CNN yesterday, about his talk about all the good he's doing. Mm-hmm. They only kept going on about, Trump and his crimes. Yeah. But, it's hard to get our story out, to get his story out. Because
that's what the news does. Yeah. If it bleeds, it leads. And so, right now Trump is bleeding, so they're MSNBC, I played the whole speech, though, so that was good. Yeah, they did. I caught part of it, and he did a good job with that. And I would prefer he had not authorized some of the fossil fuel drilling, but other than that, I am 100% behind Joe Biden and
I
Kamala
am
Harris.
too.
Okay, Bernice, thank you for the call.
Too. They're doing good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Gary in Alpharetta, Georgia. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Thank you. Very quickly, of course, it was, I don't know if it's coincidence or what brought up FDR. We need two things. We need to recognize one of the core problems why America hasn't stopped this cult following of the Trumpster. Mm-hmm. We are an immature, and it's growing.
Yeah. We
are an immature culture. Our culture is not mature enough to solve this whole problem right now.
Well, I agree. And since you invoked FDR, I know you like this, so let me just share a clip with you, Gary, and then I'll let you say whatever you want, okay? Here you go.
Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself. The technique was all set out in Hitler's book, and it was copied by the aggressors of Italy and Japan. According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood, always a big one, for its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
Tell me Donald Trump didn't take that to heart, Gary.
Exactly. FDR was a great man.
He was.
But he was a great man because he had, in my opinion, the right political philosophy. And he would have met this head on. And I close with FDR, if I could say his quote again, my favorite.
Okay.
You ready?
Yep.
Government government can err. Presidents can make mistakes. But we are told that divine justice weighs the sins of the cold-blooded and the sins of the warm-hearted on a different scale. Better the occasional faults of a government living in the spirit of charity than the consistent omissions of a government frozen in the ice of its own indifference.
Yeah, it's a brilliant quote. It's from his 1936 speech in Philadelphia, isn't it?
1930, yeah, right around there, 33, 34, right. We always go back and forth with it.
Yeah.
It's right in there. And then I first heard it by Walter Mondale in 1974, coming back from Cleveland. I heard it in the midst of Watergate.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Gary, thank you. Thank you. And thank you for reminding me of FDR. I appreciate it. Johan in Los Angeles. Hey, Johan, what's on your mind today?
I'm trying to add on to what the other lady called about Trump going to prison and maybe not go to prison.
Mm-hmm.
And I got this article about convicts from Great Britain never served their time for their crime as they sent to Americas and Australia between 1615 to 1870.
So you're suggesting, Johan, we should deport Trump rather than imprison him?
No, I mean, we should be aggressive or Trump will not go to prison.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to really go hard on him to make sure that justice is served.
Yeah.
But we all have to think about the other possibilities.
Well, Napoleon got exiled to an island, as I recall. I might be wrong on that. It might have been just an obscure part of the world, but I thought it was an island, a little island prison. I guess that's what Alcatraz was. And Alcatraz is empty right now. I've been there. So maybe they should revive Alcatraz and, make it a nice home for orange politicians. What do you think?
That I don't know, but it's possible. I mean, it is possible that he's not going to prison, and Trump supporters will love this.
Yeah.
As he, become
put him in a glass cage someplace. Johan, thank you for the call. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us. Otherwise, it's not democracy. That includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, and stay safe. We'll catch up with you tomorrow morning.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.